what the roadmap is based on.
All right.
But you're going to see where it came from originally.
And I'm so excited. How many of us have read the roadmap? Oh, good. Looks like a good majority of you have read the roadmap. So I'm not speaking to those who don't. But as I was going through the roadmap, it's my first time to this conference, I came across a quote. And the quote that was in the roadmap is by Manjit Wong, who is the Global Council of One Without Churches, member of the Global Council. And he says, if we don't reach the vulnerable children first to help them, many others will reach to harm them. And then again, I was reminded of my back days that if we do not, that preventing orphanhood and vulnerability needs to be done by addressing violence against children. Again, that I found in the roadmap. But let's just run through the strategies. So I'll run you quickly through the strategies. There are 7 strategies of Inspire, and the acronym, author of the acronym is here. There's implementation of laws, norms and values, safe environment, parent and caregiver support, income and economic strengthening, response and support services, and education and life skills. Now, in the roadmap again, the drafters have been so kind to link this to scripture, so it helps us. So I've also picked the scriptures from there. The implementation of laws has a biblical scripture that is in Romans 13:1. We'll look at it in the roadmap. But it's basically to ensure that the implementation and enforcement of laws that prohibit and prevent violence against children, reduce excessive alcohol use, and limit youth access to arms and other weapons. Now, when we talk about implementation and enforcement of laws, we are looking at laws that protect children from rape and violence. We just saw that in the video. Laws that ban sexual abuse and violent punishment, laws that ban alcohol abuse, policies, organizational policies and institutional policies that are on safeguarding, and I'm glad that the roadmap also specifically mentions the need for members to have safeguarding policies, and if they do not have, they should sign up to the WWO safeguarding policy. And I'm happy to note that Viva has been kind enough to help us with this, creating the Safe Environment Toolkit. That is a very good toolkit. I've done a lot of trainings using the Viva Safeguarding Toolkit, which is very, very useful in terms of helping us create laws and policies that govern us. Laws that support alternative family care, like the law in Kenya, and laws that prevent alcohol misuse and limit use of weapons. All these are the laws that we're looking at. So when we're talking about implementation of laws, that is it. Those are some of the summary of what we are looking at. Many a time, we in this space think that the issue of laws is for government. For me, I am the pastor of my church, and that is all I have to do. I don't think I have anything to do with the laws and policies. It is for the government to do. But I was so happy that yesterday's evening presentation helped me so much, that touched on how World Without Orphans contributed to changing of law, but not only changing of law, but ensuring the laws are implemented. So the opportunity is with us. And one thing that I would want to encourage is that we hold the power. I keep talking to, I was speaking to a group of bishops for Compassion International Uganda. And they were saying, child protection is for them, it's for you people, you are the expert. I said, no, I'm the expert and I don't have the platform, I don't have the crowd, I don't have the people that listen to me. Yeah. You just need to stand in the pulpit and just talk about this law and everybody will follow. So let us use our spaces. One, to promote the laws, but two, where it is not working, to influence so that there is change. And again, in the roadmap, there's an issue of collaboration, so we can collectively work. You don't have to know everything. You can tap on our experiences, and then we work on the laws. The next one is norms and values. This is the tough one. Norms and values, Galatians 3:28 and then James 3:17 are the biblical principles that have, the scriptures that have been quoted in the roadmap. But it's basically to look at laws and norms and values that support non-violent, respectful, nurturing, positive, inclusive, gender equitable relationship for children and adults. That is basically all that we're looking at. Now, again, we as believers at times tend to quote scripture according to our convenience, which is the scripture that we use most when we want to spank children.
Spare the rod.
Spare the rod and spoil the child. And who told us that the rod was supposed to be a stick? If you look at the shepherd held the rod to guide his sheep, right? To guide, not to spank. But for us, and the sofa, spare the rod and spoil the child. The Bible says so. I am a believer. I am doing what the Bible tells me. Let us not normalize some of these things by quoting scripture. So some of these norms and values, we normalize them and we make them actually become the rule, and even teach them, like in Sunday school, say, you know what the Bible says? I am here. I am a believer. I am a preacher of the word of God, and I am going by the Bible. But let us interpret the script according to what it should be. But there are some of the programs that have been tested. Again, Inspire Strategies is a set of strategies that have been tested and evaluated. So one of them that has contributed to shifting norms is SASA, using the SASA. And SASA is an acronym that was created in Uganda, but it is a community mobilization approach to challenge and change social norms that perpetuate violence against women and violence against children. It was developed by Raising Voices, and it has been evaluated at all levels and currently being used in more than 25 countries and 60 organizations. It is within the Inspire. SASA basically, that is it. Start, awareness, support, and action. That is how it works. At the bottom of it, if you see the arrow, it's involving community members, leaders, and institutions to build the critical mass. But at the beginning, you need to learn about the community, select the community activists. In other places, they're called activistas. You foster power within staff and the community activists. The second one is raising awareness, and that is after you've selected the people, you build confidence and helping the awareness, and helping the activists gain confidence through activities and encouraging critical thinking. Then you support the work by strengthening the skills and connections between the community and members and joining power with others to support the change. And then you take the action, changing the behavior, trying new behaviors, celebrating change. This is what SASA is about, that you start to raise awareness, support, and take action. But this is also very, very context specific. We look at what works within the context. A SASA in Uganda may not be what will work in Sri Lanka. Yeah. So how does safe environment work? It uses local activism. It uses media advocacy.
Keep on. I won't, when you're done, I want to say something about it.
Okay. It uses community activism, local activism, media advocacy, and every other action that needs to be undertaken around that. So that is SASA, maybe.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that again, this is one of the, if you look at experimental research where they take big groups and that get a program and they compare it with a big group that doesn't get the program, that's called a randomized trial. But this has been evaluated in those kinds of gold standard experimental studies, and it's the best one in the world. And that's why it's been reproduced in 70 places. It is in the roadmap, the links, all of it is available for free. You can freely use it, download it, adapt it. The one, I think that, let me see, wait a minute, which one is this one? Yes. So the one in the roadmap is the faith version. And I wanted to say what that means. The Catholic Church in one of the countries that also has a pretty big Muslim population adapted it so it could be used by Catholics, by Christians or Muslims. And it can be used in communities that have both as well. The full program takes 3 years, so it's more than most groups want to really do. But it has been adapted successfully down to a 6-month or 1-year program. And so the important thing for you to know is you can take what's there, which has been shown to work, and you can feel free to adapt it to your culture and your circumstances. And we have different studies from global AIDS work that show that it works. I wanted to tell you, I was in a little village in Malawi, about 2 hours from the capital, having to evaluate the use of SLASA in that little village. And there have been a lot of gender-based violence. And I was at the community meeting of leaders all sitting out under trees on blankets. And there were Muslim imams and Christian pastors and village chiefs and some of the, parents, et cetera. 30 people just sitting around having talks about this program. And it's run off of just simple posters that have pictures. And there's a Bible verse on one side and a Quran verse on the other side, or you can do either, like the actual program. And so what was amazing is the Muslim priests and the Christian pastors were talking about gender-based violence and if they thought it was right or wrong and what their sacred writings say about it. And I thought, this is like surreal to be here listening to all of it. But they came to the decision, all of them together talking about it, that it was wrong and they were not going to tolerate it anymore and they were going to begin reporting it. And they actually had someone, a non-governmental organization that was coming from the capital city to take reports by sending a caseworker on a motorcycle into that little village to take case reports of anyone who wanted to report abuse. But what I want to tell you about, this is amazingly versatile, and there is a version that has been adapted for use in Christian settings. But I wanted to let you keep going.
You want to say one more thing?
I just want to ask, is it just in Christianity and Islam, or is there other religions available as well?
Most other religions don't have their sacred writings, and so it has only been adapted to those two. But if you didn't want to use either of those, the core package online is faith neutral. It doesn't have anything at all. But I'm just saying, if you want one that does easily adaptable, already has all the Bible verses with all the main points, it's there and it's in the roadmap.
And it's open source, it's in the roadmap. Thank you very much, Susan, for the compliment. Then there is the issue of safe environments. Create and sustain safe physical, social environments where children and youth gather and spend time. And I want to add to that, where they can safely report. Sometimes we assume that, we've had over the days people saying that I couldn't speak, I couldn't talk to anybody. And they assume that the safe spaces exist, but they don't. So again, with increased activity online, we've seen that there's high risks now for children, for even ourselves engaging online. So safe spaces online, safe spaces around schools, safe spaces in schools are critical. This is just one of the child protection flip books that we can use, especially if you're thinking about how to create safe spaces. It's also available online. But I just wanted to speak to one of them about the other one is to the safe touch. The through touch talk, we are on a journey to look at what justice is and what it means. For us, justice needs to be focused on the survivor. We direct the children to a Shalom Center, which provides holistic approach to healing and everything else. So that is what the touch talk is about, to create that space where children can come and confidently have conversations. Again, this can be adapted in your churches, in your communities where you are. The next one is the parent and caregiver support. I'll not dwell a lot on this because there's been a huge conversation in all the side meetings or the breakaway sessions that have talked about parent and caregiver support. And it is basically aimed at reducing harsh practices and create positive parent and child relationship. I will not go into detail about that, but just to highlight why it is important for preventing violence against children. That the more securely children are attached to their parents, the less likely they are to grow to become aggressive. If you teach a child love, the child will show love. If you teach a child harsh punishment, the child will also grow that. Behavior management. Again, through positive parenting, discipline such as teach children what they can do, what they should know, what they shouldn't do is also important, as opposed to reprimanding them all the time. It also improves regulation and reduces behavior problems within children. Again, it helps in cognitive stimulation. Many children who have grown up with parents talking to them in a certain way, grow up with that mannerism. I don't know how many of you were in my last session that I shared. I don't know whether I shared with you how I was brought to order by my little boy. He is now 30. So at age 4, a visitor had come. And at that time, I was very new in the space of child protection. So I had him having a conversation in the local language with my sister and saying, my mother can shout. My daddy calls me Marvin. My auntie calls me Marvin. My mother says, Marvin. So the tone was clear that I was harassing him. So from that day, I changed. Again, I'll not go to the PLH model because that was talked about. There was a whole session and many of you were in that. I would like to talk a little bit about income and economic strengthening. I'm linking it to poverty. Poverty is what really reduces people to nothing. And when you can barely afford a meal, you're reduced to nothing. So strengthening income and economic capacity of families is very, very important. Improve family economic security, stability, and malnutrition, and that will also help the decrease in intimate partner violence. I'm reminded, I worked in Northern Uganda in a conflict situation where we were trying to advocate for children who are being abducted by the LRA rebels. If you heard about that story where the LRA rebels were abducting many girls and taking them away. So we're advocating for their protection. So I come across a lady, and she is there offering up her 3 daughters for trafficking. She's selling them up, yeah. And then I told her, no, you don't need to do that. I said, well, if I don't give them up, if I don't sell them, they're going to die out of starvation. So the person who will take them, I'm hoping, will take care of them, look after them, regardless of what happens, let them go. And she had given them away for 50,000 is how much in dollars?
50,000 was about
$15. Given them away for $15. 3 were her daughters. So gave them away for $15, and then she was there wailing and saying, yeah, I've given them away, but I know they're safe. At least I'm not going to watch them die. Now that is what poverty does. That it reduces you to make very wrong choices. It affects the mind, it affects your physical, and it affects the choices that you make. So it's important. If we are to reduce violence against children or even against women, strengthening their capacity is very, very important. A lot of women are endure violence. Why? Because I cannot report him. If I do, he is the breadwinner. What happens? And even when they go to the police, they say, so you're bringing your husband, so what are you going to eat tomorrow? Anyway, if I were you, I wouldn't even be having it. So some of these are realities that we see. So income and economic strengthening is important for preventing drug. I've already talked about that. Poverty contributes to unsafe environment. It increases likelihood of children dropping out of school. When you have income and economic strengthening, it can reduce violence in the house. There's positive role models for women, and there are examples in the Inspire strategies that we can use. Cash transfers, saving loans, microfinance, that can be combined with the training to help get women out of this. And again, like they said, yes, was it this morning, that we've been talking about our role to save orphans, but we forget that there is an appendix to that orphan. There is the widow. And if we do not talk about the mother, we leave her out of the picture and just focus on the child. What are we doing to this woman? First of all, she's lost her husband, and then she's now taking care of this, and then you coming in and say, oh, no, sit aside. The orphans are our role. We need to evaluate.
That's also in the roadmap.
It's also in the roadmap. So then, response and support services. Again, improving access to good quality health, social welfare, and justice support mechanisms, especially including reporting violence against children, is very, very key to reduce long-term impact from violence. And the support goals are for basically have a system of helping children, find out which children need help children immediately and in the longer term, and protect them, children in conflict with the law. I have used that example of the Uganda Child Helpline. I'll tell you a story about how that started. I was, many years ago, again, seated in my office. I was the director of the network, coordinating the network. No business with children. I mean, I only work with organizations. I don't deal directly with the children. And so I'm there on my laptop, and then a lady walks in. And then as she's starting to explain something, she had a baby, 4-year-old. So the baby coughed. And then there was a pool of blood in my office. And then I did this and said, wait a minute, so what happened? So this child was repeatedly abused by the father, by the grandfather, by the uncle, and this lady was just looking for help. So she saw the word child, because the organization is called Uganda Child Rights NGO Network. So she saw the word child, and then she came. Now, what ran through my mind is that if there was a mechanism that she could use to report, she didn't have to walk the business. So then I talked to the telecom companies, who initially gave us a long number, and then we started engaging with the government to have a national helpline. And I'm glad that we now have a national helpline that has the number 116. And if you look at that logo, Sauti, I don't know whether you see that child hugging. That was my idea, to have a child hugging. I mean, the parent hugging the child. I don't see that. Yeah, that is it. So basically, Sauti now, when we started, it has a handbook, it has a case management model. It is very good for psychosocial support. We are receiving a number of calls. I think Susan visited the child helpline when she was in Uganda. But one of the things about the child helpline is that when we started running it as an organization, it was receiving 70 calls a day. Today, we receive 1,700 calls a day. And out of that, 20% require urgent action, meaning rescue. The children need to be rescued. And so it is now being adopted by government. It is now fully run by government, and we are happy that UNICEF and other stakeholders are investing in that. So
I'm glad to say one thing. Yeah, what you just modeled is what we've got to have God multiply in every country. I mean, you see, basically, Stella responded to the emergency in front of her and started getting something done. And they gave her that crazy long telephone number that nobody can remember. It's not going to help it. She went back on a shorter telephone number. And even in the beginning, there were not that many calls. I mean, even though 70 days sounds like a lot. But, we cannot despise these days with small beginnings. So much of what God does is he just tells us to take the next step by faith. And then as we take the next step by faith, and we put that foot of ours in the Red Sea or the Jordan River, suddenly before we know it, it's party. I am just so honored to know you. You're amazing. But anyway, keep going.
So the 116 is now operational. If you can write this number, that was the original number, 0800, just write it down, 0800 111 222, 0800. The second one, there's the 0800 111 222, and then 0800 111 243. Now, Susan has triggered me to share with you quickly what happened with that long number and why we went to 116. And it took a lot of lobbying at International Telecom Union. We had to ask.
Is this ridiculous?
So now, what the telecom company did was just gave us a number. So there was a time that there was a child in crisis. So the child called the telecom call center, and telecom call center was 243. So all they could tell us was the child said, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. Pop. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. And for the whole night, she kept calling that number because she couldn't remember it. And then we never heard from that child again. So that is what motivated us to lobby for the 116. And I'm glad that we lobbied for Uganda, but also lobbied for Africa, that is now across the continent. All the numbers for child helplines is 116 when we go to Kenya. And the reason we did that was so that it could help cross-country engagement. If a child was trafficked across to Nairobi, they should be able to still call 116 and get help.
Wait, so we can use that number where?
In
Africa.
I mean, I live in Ethiopia, so we can use
Yes.
116.
116 in Ethiopia, you can use it, yes. Well, Ethiopia also has a child helpline, 116. So education and life skills, I will not again labor. Yesterday, I had a whole session that I took you through the Good School Toolkit, that is an educational high school, but it is also a strategy for prevention of violence against children. Keep children in school, train them, raise awareness, and then you actually reduce violence by so many percentage. Yesterday I talked about 42% as a result of the Good School. But there's also one educational life skill model that's coaching boys to men that builds strong teams and healthy relationships among athletes and young peers. Again, this happens, you know how it is very common for violence to happen within the sports sector. Then, why self-education? Well, self-education is important to prevent violence against children. School setting is the entry point for many children. And we see a lot of children going, you can reach a lot of children through school, you can reach a lot of parents through schools, and so on and so forth. I've already talked about the case for the Good School, and that marks the end. My last show, and then I'll hand over to Rabbi.
While you are changing over, even Zimbabwe, the helpline for kids is 116.
Yes, it's 116, yeah. It's across Africa. We all meet together and we have.
Why don't we you have several questions for Stella, but I'm gonna go before Praveen, and then Praveen will close us up. Stella, why don't we see,
Okay.
are you gonna need to? Okay, go ahead. What? You go ahead and talk, if you can take questions, I'll get my computer going.
Okay. Questions? Any questions? No questions. Really, makes sense for
There is a hand.
So which one is which? Did I confuse you?
Two hands, Stella, two hands, two questions. Go ahead now.
You were talking about this
Children deserve the opportunity.
You were talking about SASA, and you said it takes 3 years to get there.
The full
Or you
program
were
is
talking
yes. The full program, you saw those 4 different goals.
Yes.
The full program is 3 years, maybe like once every couple weeks or something, in communities with the top leaders. Because if you're gonna really have a total revamping and transformation of all the dangerous norms and values, usually it takes that long to get it to stick. However, we have supported in PEPFAR with my job with government, our government in the United States that provides a lot of support in countries heavily hit by AIDS. We have supported those through faith networks, and they've easily accomplished a lot of significant change in 6 to 12 months. So the nice thing that you could do, knowing your culture where you're serving, is you can look at the whole toolkit. It's all available for free, and you can choose what you think is most important for your context. You can adapt it however you need to adapt it, but what works is there, and you can just pull from it and then use it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And another question?
I just wanted to know about the mom who wanted to give up her 3 daughters. What happened?
She gave up the 3 daughters. She did give up the 3 daughters for $50, but she was now busy regretting and crying. But then she was comforted that the daughters were somewhere, but we do not know what happened to them.
To thrive, to grow up in safe, nurturing relationships and environments. But 1 billion children are affected by violence every year. This is a terrifying and desperate situation for them, and it's also an urgent public health problem. But no matter what the political or economic situation, violence against children can be prevented. The cost of is huge. Failure to act against violence undermines many other investments in children, including in their health and education, often causing lifelong damage to individuals, families, and communities in countless ways, exacerbating problems of mental health, school dropout, alcohol and drug abuse, exposure to HIV and AIDS, and many more risks. Most tragically, it raises the risk of further perpetration of violence against the next generation of children in a vicious and destructive cycle. Who's responsible for acting? Well, governments play a key role in preventing violence and safeguarding children. One of the most important functions of any government is to make homes, communities, and schools into positive, caring places, and to ensure that families have the means to protect their children. but is challenging for governments, which are often pulled in many directions by a huge range of different stakeholders and concerned citizens. The INSPIRE framework can help. It's a set of 7 strategies that governments can use to prevent and respond to violence against children. Evidence already shows that well-designed programs using the INSPIRE framework have reduced violence by 20 to 50%. The 2020 Global Status Report on Ending Violence Against Children maps progress in implementing the INSPIRE framework in 155 countries. It provides a baseline to help governments monitor their progress towards ending violence. Although governments around the world support the INSPIRE strategies, the report shows that far more work is needed to end violence against children. Why? Well, for example, 83% of countries have the survey data they need to protect children, but only 21% are using it to set the right prevention baselines and targets. 80% of countries have a national action plan to prevent violence against children, but only 20% of them are fully funded. And although the laws that protect children from violence are enacted all around the world, they're poorly enforced. INSPIRE can help. It's urgent that governments use INSPIRE to do a number of simple things. Develop a national action plan to reduce violence against children and make sure it has precise targets for reductions in violence. Appoint an agency to coordinate multi-sectoral action and give it the resources it needs to do its job properly. Increase funding for evidence-based approaches to ending violence against children. Use the technical guidance in the INSPIRE package to scale up and increase the reach of the programs. And finally, enact and enforce laws to ensure the absolute prohibition of all forms of violence against children in all settings.
Sharing that because for many years we've been on the sidelines. It is nobody's business. We've been doing business as usual. We've been, again, I'll use the example I have been at the pulpit, we've been preaching, we've been reaching out to communities, but we have not done what we're supposed to do. It's time for us to step out of our comfort zones. Stop doing business as usual. Let's do business unusual. Thank you very much.
Stella, I don't think I've ever told anyone how involved I was in INSPIRE, but you kind of let the cat out of the bag. I actually helped write it in my job with the Ministry of Health in the United States, working collaboratively with the global lead for violence, not a World Health Organization. And I had never seen that video that you just showed. And it was very moving. I mean, I know about all the reports that are in every country, but you never know when you just take that next step, what can happen. Like you took the next step, got that little girl and ended up, or a phone number that's used in every country in Africa for children to get help. And I never knew what was going to happen with INSPIRE when I wrote the first version, and we've got the process together. I want to just share a little bit with you about it, because I cannot tell you how important I think it is for us to all be asking the Lord while we're here, what is the next step you are asking me to make by faith? And it is going to be little right now, but it can become really big, like with you. And honestly, like God did it with what He has allowed me to contribute. So I was at the point that this happened, and I was writing it. I was working at our Centers for Disease Control in the United States, and I was leading the increased number of national surveys around the world in countries that would just measure across the country how much violence, physical, sexual, emotional, against children occurs each and every year, those surveys. And as I was doing it, I realized we actually know exactly how to prevent this, and it does no good if we're measuring it on all these countries with all these governments and with UNICEF without linking it to what works to stop it. So I went to my boss and I said, this makes no sense. I'm doing all this global work and we're getting all the bad news, but we're not telling anybody what to do to stop it. Like, we need to figure that out. And so my boss said, well, that needs to be your job. And I thought, oh, okay. And because, like sometimes you don't realize that when you complain about something, you're going to become the solution. I didn't anticipate that. And so then I realized, oh my goodness, this is going to be a job a lot bigger than one person. So I assembled about 5 of the top scientists at the CDC, and we reviewed 10 years of all the world's best studies on these strategies. It was clear from the evidence what the strategies were. We had a different acronym initially for it, THRIVES, when we were just using it inside of the CDC. But it was exactly the same elements, just a different acronym. And so that took us about like 8 months to review for each of those strategies, 10 years worth of the best studies, and figure out which works best. So we did all that. Then once we had produced it, we started having meetings with UNICEF and USAID, PEPFAR, and the World Bank, and World Health Organization, because we realized all those organizations were using those exact same strategies. They just called them a little different things. Like some of them called them parenting support. Others called them parenting training. I mean, they just had a little bit, the names of the things were enough different that you didn't necessarily realize they were all saying the same thing. So then once we got internally to CDC, we began having meetings with these key 10 organizations and saying, like, we're all saying the same thing. Could we all just use this THRIVES package that we put together? And they said no, because we don't want them to think it's the CDC name. We want our own new name. And so then it took about 6 months of thinking and praying for me to think of a name, because nobody else was thinking of one. And actually God showed it to me in the middle of the night. That's how I felt about it, which I haven't really told many people. But do you think I ever knew when I was doing that? I mean, I knew it was going to be recommended by the United Nations for every country in the world to use, but I never really knew every country in the world would be using it. So what happened with me for every country also happened in the world for violence prevention, also happened with Stella for the hotline throughout the continent of Africa. Fast forward to 10 years ago, I was in a meeting with US government leads who do work globally, and someone who leads work for protecting children globally with USAID said, well, we need to really advance the work that we're doing around the world with governments, leads. But one thing we need to make sure we don't do is we don't work with those Christian groups. And like, I was there representing the government. And inside, I'm like, you're talking about my family. What are you saying that for? I felt insulted. But then I just said, well, like, why are you saying that? Well, because all they want to do is put money in orphanages. They don't really care about helping children. And I asked them, have you ever tried to bring them the best science so that they would be able to use it? And people kind of said nothing. And I decided that moment that if God ever let me take the best science to the church, by golly, I would do it. So whatever situation you're in, I just think God is giving, our group here is small, and I think our group here is the right people. And just know that whatever next small thing you are going to do, God can do. Ephesians 2:20, exceedingly, abundantly, above and beyond all we can ask or imagine, to glorify his name and spread what he cares about in the world for his glory by our obedience. So, did not mean to preach, but I couldn't help it. So anyway, that's that. Bye. I love you.
Just to say that from this Inspire, we were doing training all over the world, and we've been able to reach out to 37 countries that have now made commitment to develop programs and violence against children. And Susan, when she came to Uganda, I remember the permanent secretary gave her like a stack of 10 books.
She did.
Yeah, so she went, and then in the morning she came, I finished reading everything, and this and this and this, and then the permanent secretary said, wow, okay. So we will become a pathfinding country. That is how Uganda actually made a decision to become a pathfinding country, leading the way of our efforts to end violence against children. And let us, like Susan said, let us all start because let us just do something. Don't just sit, do something.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
I'm sorry I have to go.
I pray for both. There you go. Call me or text me and let me know how much. And if you need anything, let us know.
No, I have good people here that help.
Good. So I just want to quickly go through the data parts of the roadmap so that you know they're there. And so the other thing that we wanted to do was make sure that Christians have access to what are the measures that really work and what are the simple ones that are not expensive to get. And so that's what this is about. So data, what's our definition? Why are multi-sector and multi-program data important? How are they used? Key types, and what are our core indicators? I always like to start this talk with recognizing that people who really love data, like honestly, I'm a person who loves data, they actually often really love people too. And sometimes people just think, oh, that's that data nerd over there running, the models and crunching numbers, and they don't care about people. This is a really dear believer that led a lot of the data for Viva, and they lost him during the pandemic, and we're really sad. And one of the tributes to him, even though his job was, I already said that, wait a minute, okay. Then we don't only care about like parenting. We care about economic strengthening, we care about education, we care about laws. So why is it important to get data from these different sources? It's because that often this violence problem touches not just the child, it touches the child, the family, the community, and society. These accelerators already talked about. So of the Inspire package, the three that together make the most difference are the P, the parenting, the E, the education, and the I, income and economic strengthening. And I see, I'm gonna wait a minute, tell me when you got your picture. I've become more sensitive to people taking pictures, and I'm trying to like not go to the next one before somebody snaps. Because don't you hate that? You're like, oh, I want to get that picture, and then they bring on the next one. Okay, so if you're ever doing proposals or for a big donor or even a small donor, a lot of times they'll say, "What's your rate of change?" And all that means is like, why do you think that the model you're proposing works? And I'm just saying that this is the simplest one. It's one that almost everyone uses. That's it. If you want to help the child, you have to realize the child is inside of a family. The family is inside of a community, and we would say, and hopefully inside of a church, but that also occurs inside of society. And the risk factors that ultimately affect the child, all of these things in boxes are risk factors that increase the risk of violence. And they operate at these different levels. And so it makes sense that you would have to have a lot of strategies, Inspire, because you need to be touching those different risks that operate at different levels. So this is how data can be used. They can be used to inform the programs and the needs at the very beginning. They can actually guide your design of the program. They can make sure you're accountable for the program, and they can help you monitor the outcomes. And most of the times these days, there are like lots of different kinds of data that we use. But I want to talk just for a second about the two key kinds. Most of what we have in the roadmap is monitoring. And monitoring just means how much of a particular service did I deliver to what people, and did I really help the end beneficiary, which is the family and the child. That's monitoring. It's what most programs want. USAID, that's what they want, for example. But evaluation is what you saw with the Hope groups. Does this really work to help decrease violence and abuse of children and to help improve mental health? That is beyond what most of you will need to do, the evaluation part. But most of you would need to do the monitoring. So, I also want to say that there's different levels of what you would measure in monitoring. The output is the lower level, and it's just activities. How many trainings did you do? Or how many roadmaps did you print or distribute? The outcome is the intermediate level, and it tracks some of the benefits because of the service. And it might be that some of the benefits are decrease in the numbers of children who end up needing to be referred for psychological help, for example. But then the impact is the highest level, and it's actual reductions in what you most care about, which is what we had shown with the groups, for example.
I just want you to know that we actually do have a framework and a strategy and a strategic plan for WWO. The objectives we use are taken from the Stanford Collective Impact Model of the 5 components of a program that you have to have for it to be effective. And one is that you have to, let me just say what they are. You have to have a common shared agenda, and that's what the CAS vision is. You have to, common shared agenda, keep the shared measures, shared communication, coordinated action, and you have to have a backbone coordinating structure. And we took those and adapted those to make these objectives, to promote best practices, measure your output, employ communication, and have collaboration. And some of our key results there, you see that they're outputs and outcomes, like I was talking about. So we are measuring simple things. How much is the roadmap access used for trainings? How many global and regional trainings occurred? And we talk about these things on the global team every year. And for the global facilitation community, how many regional teams and national teams actually become functional, and how many networks are we collaborating with, and how many church and stakeholder networks. Because we're not actually helping on the global team, we're not really helping the individual child. We're actually just trying to help serve national and regional leaders and networks so that they can better and more effectively reach the children. And evaluation, I'm not going to go into that because we are not really trying to show that. But let me tell you why we're not evaluating. So for all the programs in the roadmap, we already know from Inspire what they do. That little video that Stella showed, you can decrease violence by 20 to 50%. They're already very expensive, multiple studies, multiple countries that show all those things work. We don't really need to show again something works unless it's new. Like the hope groups are new in a war setting. So we did need to show it works. But most of all the rest of the programs in the roadmap, we don't need to show they work. We know they work. Like we know most parenting support reduces violence by half. So I'm just going to let you know, I'm not going to go through these with any detail, but in each chapter of the roadmap, in the foundation chapters, thank you for Praveen for your work in helping us get this where it needed to be. We have, for the roadmap, we have indicators for collaboration, living refresh, prevention, and intervention, those 4 foundations. And the indicators are described there. I'm going to talk about them in a minute, but at the end of each of your chapters in the roadmap, it'll tell you outcomes, or is that what we're calling them? Is outcomes? Let me just remember for me. Let me look at the end of the data chapter here. Yeah. Yes, it would just be called World Without Orphans Prevention Questionnaire and the monitoring and evaluation that you need. Basically, it's just, it will show you the questions that you can use to measure these different things. So for broad scale collaboration, we want to know, is a national team functioning, collaborative, and multi-sphere? And we describe what all that means. For living refreshed, there are spiritual, relational, and practical components. And we have measures for that. You can use for those if you want. For prevention and intervention, we just want to know how many children, families, leaders, and organizations are being reached every year with the things that you're doing. So just so that you know, if you follow the links, you have questions like these ones on collaboration, our adaptations of UNICEF indicators that are used all over the world. So UNICEF only has something as an indicator if they've tried it a lot and they see that it works. And so we just thought, like, we'll use something that somebody else who's tried it a lot and whose job it is in every country to take care of children has used it and has seen that it works. So you have those. This is just an example. If we measure this 1 year with the World Without Orphans national and regional teams and found that 88% of them had functioning, we would describe it as functioning, meeting at least once a quarter, and having notes, for example. That's what functioning is. Collaborative, having at least 3 different collaborative, I don't even remember how we define it. Multi-sphere means you have at least 3 different kinds of experts represented. It might be a psychologist and a teacher, and it might be a pastor, but at least 3 different kinds, not just everybody, only pastors. And then living refreshed, there are spiritual components of self-care from validated global measures. There are relational components of self-care, and there are practical examples. And this is from a globally validated resilience question. And then this is examples of what we found. And when we use this with the national and regional leaders in World Outward Events, that they were doing really well spiritually and relationally. And most of them were doing a horrible job practically, not sleeping enough, not eating enough, not getting enough exercise. And so we talked about like, what can we do to start helping ourselves feel a little better practically and taking care of ourselves? And then intervention, what I just said, that focuses on what we talked about this morning, reunification, kinship, foster care, and adoption in that plenary. But basically how many children, parents and caregivers, leaders, and organizations would include children, churches, are reached in a given year. And this is what we found just in one brief survey 1 year early on when we used this. And this is prevention, the same kind of things, these Inspire strategies we just went through. How many of these strategies, have you used one or more of these Inspire strategies in the past year with to reach children, parents, leaders, organizations? And then this is how many have so. And it's amazing how, just going backwards, if you're working with organizations and maybe 2 leaders from each organization, you can reach a lot of families. You know, if you just say each of those 600 leaders reach 10 families, that's already, or reached, just reached 10 families. It's about 6,000. It's amazing. And then if each of those families had about 2 children, you reach nearly like 12,000. So it's amazing how, with excellent training of organizations and leaders who are already serving families and children, you can reach a lot of people really fast without a big expense. And I want to say that in addition to having this hard copy, this full roadmap is online. And you can look at it online by just downloading the roadmap. Or if you go and you click prevention, all the different programs that you might want to look at. Remember I talked about the SASA program? You can click the link and it'll open to the full program. The online interactive version, there's an online static version, which is this roadmap. The interactive version, you can just click prevention and every single program with every single link will just open up for you. And you can click the link that says WWO results measures for prevention, and you can just click it and it will open for you. And all those questions that I just showed you on that survey are right there. You can use those or you can use different ones, but at least I want you to know and have seen you have them. Okay, that's it. That's all I wanted to do. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned before that some of your government friends were a bit skeptical about working with Christian organizations.
Yeah.
And then also in here, you've got some indicators that talk about working with churches. So do you have any evidence or a growing body of evidence that kind of makes a case one way or another as to the advantage or disadvantage of working with churches in this?
It's a great question. The government groups were skeptical because of the reputation for working with orphanages. Government groups are not skeptical if you have evidence that churches are reaching families and children with what works. They are thrilled. And because governments know, governments never have enough funding to reach the number of families and children that need help. Did that answer your question?
Yes, but is there evidence from these questions?
Do you mean, does WWO have evidence? Or do you mean, is there evidence anywhere?
From these specific indicators.
These are indicators that USAID recommends. And so USAID would have great reams of information. They don't typically separate out churches. And in many countries, churches are reported as organizations. And if you see this question, it says organizations or churches. They don't really care what it is that's reaching parents and children. I think what you're really wanting to know is, how do interventions that are implemented by Christians differ from those that are implemented by people who aren't? Is that what you're really trying to figure out? So there is some great evidence of that in the HIV arena, and we can talk about that more later if you want. But because I've been involved in helping that for about 5 years. But there is some absolutely stellar information that basically shows often faith-based groups will have better out. If a non-faith-based group uses just say program A, and the Program A is going to be used by two groups, a faith-based group and a non-faith-based group. Often the faith-based group will have better outcomes. And my theory is, like, let me tell you, coaching boys into men. Let me tell you a true story about that. So, the CDC director found $1 million of extra end of the year money and decided he wanted to give it to something at CDC, which, we do Ebola, we do HIV, we do what? Hypertension, we do things all over the world. And he decided he wanted to give it to Inspire because CDC was very proud that CDC had developed it and led it for the world. So then he asked me, like, where should we be giving it? I said, we need to give it in Uganda that have very high violence against children. And so, and I think you need to give it to World Vision. They do excellent work, which is kind of ironic because you're working at World Vision, which I didn't even realize that until, I started looking at it. Oh yeah, he'll really like this example. So, coaching boys into men is a stellar intervention. And not only could it be given to coaches, it can be given to teachers. And so World Vision has a lot of great connections in Uganda, in Witana, that part of, it's not Kampala, but that part of Uganda. And so they were going to widely implement it with these $1 million in lots of schools and to evaluate, did it work? What was fascinating is it worked significantly better for World Vision than it had worked in those experimental gold standard studies of like one group does it, one group doesn't. And I talked with Gilbert Kamanga, was the country director for World Vision at that point. He's down in Kenya. And I asked him, like, Gilbert, why do you think this is? And he said, I'm not sure, but I think it's because if you have people that are people of faith teaching and implementing something, they typically are not doing it out of obligation, but they're doing it out of love. And I think you're going to go a lot farther using what works when you combine it with love than using what works when you combine it with obligation. And I think he's right. So what's sad is there's not much published on it. But do I know information that supports it? Yes. And we do need to have some things published on it. Okay, Praveen, we need to let you go. How much time do you have? Like 10 minutes? Okay. Like you can. I'll talk to you afterwards. We got to let Praveen go ahead.
Okay.
And do this. You got to see this really in real life, and I'm happy to stay with you afterwards. I'm so sorry, Praveen. You should have told me. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take, we have 5 minutes or 2.5 minutes.
Can we negotiate to give you an extra?
No, I think it should be good that we'll have the resources. So.
Praveen, please take 10. Please do.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, let's see, yeah.
We'll just shorten our tea time by those minutes.
Yes.
So I think what was shown was great because that is, Dr. Susan did show the impact of Inspire and how WW were connected. So what I'm just going to show in these few slides is that Inspire really works with the roadmap combination, combined with the roadmap. This is in the 6 months in 2023. We worked in 17 countries. That was 11 in Europe with Hope Groups and 6 with seed funding. And this is just where World Without Orphans funded any programs, not the other programs that our partners just implemented. So we had a direct reach of, with seed funding, where we gave them a bit of cash. 620 churches, and reached 740 leaders, over 800 families. And indirectly, you can see the numbers there, over 3,000 churches, 6,000 leaders, 50,000 families, and 78,000 children. And in Hope Groups, there was 1,500 participants just for that 6-month period. I'm not going to go through the Inspire strategies. So these are some of the seed funding projects. It was a TOT where they inspired church leaders to on family-based care, and then these church leaders in turn went and trained their congregations. And the two, I'm not going to go into detail, but the two INSPIRE strategies that were implemented were the norms and values and parent and caregiver support. And then in Sri Lanka, in my country, parenting tips were taught with churches, with 100 leaders across 20 churches. And that too, there was a multiplication of reaching 4,000 children, and the two INSPIRE strategies that were used were the norms, values, and the parents and caregiver support. And in Uganda, that was an amazing program. That was it was a long program. It was a trauma-informed camp. That was the end. But it started with the training of parents and caregivers, pastors, to serve the ambassadors who would come for these trainings. And that too reached over 300 leaders were trained, and indirectly 3,000 children were impacted. And many INSPIRE strategies, the norms and values, parent and caregiver support, education, life skill, and safe environment. Then we had Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe actually did a training on the roadmap itself. Yeah, I'm not going into detail on the roadmap. They just covered the roadmap and training how to take the roadmap into the communities. The two INSPIRE strategies were the norms and values and parent and caregiver support. And in Brazil, there was a trauma-informed camp, CARE TOT. Again, it was just to help children to remain in a safe and loving family. Yeah. So they brought in 30 leaders across Brazil, and they in turn trained others who had their congregations and reached 20,000 families and 12,000 children. And the two INSPIRE strategies were the norms, values, and the parent and caregiver support. And lastly, the hope groups. More than, finally, I mean, this was not in the 6-month period, but yeah, over 2,000 Ukrainians participated in over 10 countries. And that too, I'll just give you a glimpse of, how the INSPIRE was used, the norms and values, the parent and caregiver support, safe environment, education, life skill. So this is just something, in this just 6 months, how WWO did take the INSPIRE strategies and implement them. And so INSPIRE does work. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And,
Wow. You're an amazing teacher.
I have some questions for you.
You showed the indirect and direct results. So what's the difference between the two?
Okay, so the direct is where I'm training you all, I'm training 20 people, so that's direct. Then when you go and train somebody else, that's the indirect. So how we measure that is by, Susan, you want to just help me explain that?
Sure. So,
Yes, this is what's so amazing about these learning communities and working together. So, for example, just pretend that we had, these all happened in 2023, right?
Yeah.
So in 2022, we did regional roadmap trainings in the programs in this roadmap for every region, trying to adapt it to what helped that region most. So we had like 4 half days of training in the roadmap for Asia, 4 half days of training in the roadmap for South America, 4 half days for the Middle East, 4 half days for Africa. I think that's what I said. And so, so then we're all sitting here, but if you can do virtual trainings and have the same information communicated, you can actually be equipping a lot more people in your own countries because they can join either together. A lot of them did it together like this because we always have interactive parts of it. So during the interactive sessions, Uganda would be talking, Rwanda would be talking, South Africa would be talking, and then everybody would come back together and report back like what they got out of their discussions. Okay, so you have those trainings, and with all of you in the room, for example, we would give you these questions that we have, that I just showed you, those questions that we had gone through. How many organizations are you reaching, or churches are you reaching, and how many families and how many children are you reaching now, and do you plan to reach with these training? So what we actually ask is how many are you planning to reach? Or we ask how many are you reaching now, but we were hoping that you would try to reach basically, like if you're reaching these people in your church and you're a pastor, we are hoping you are planning to keep reaching them. And because we don't have enough time or staff to go back and check, we didn't. If you were really doing good research, you'd go back and check. But we have, this is very common in program reporting, is that if someone is coming and participating and planning to use it, you are hoping and assuming and asking them, only like fill this out if you're planning to go back and use it. Because we don't want to train people who are not going to use something and going to stick it on the wall. We want to train people who are going to use it. Okay, so that's that. Then say, with the other thing that is, condition of training you is, after you have this training, we are expecting you to multiply it. We are only inviting called, committed multipliers to the training, people who are already training and multiplying what they're using. So we think we have the right people in the room. But once we do, I would participate. For example, I would like to say, okay, guys, we would want you by 6 weeks from now to have planned your training in your own local church and the network of people that you work with to take the same thing that we're giving you here and give it to them and find out from them. How many people, organizations, families, and children do you plan to reach with this training? So when we're reporting the total results, it would be the adding what you're going to do here with after you go and train 50 other people in your church or in your network, and you ask them the same questions, all the data would come to WW. You'd push a button called add, push it, the program. And then we would sum for you. It would be the total of your direct and your indirect reached. But I would be providing mentoring help for you as you got ready to do the training, reviewing everything that we had done today, asking you, do any of you have any questions about it, so that you all feel confident about doing it alone. Then you do it, and then we have a follow-up call to have a discussion. How did it go, and what else do you think needs to happen differently? So those actually worked best when in the country people physically got together, because then they supported each other beforehand with, okay, how are we going to do this? How are you going to do it where you're doing it? How am I going to do it? And then they did it. And then if they came back together, which is what they do in Zimbabwe all the time, they actually physically meet in the country, even though the global team is not physically there, whoever the expert is, we are virtually there. And then you do it. So did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great.
One question. What is the criteria to be trained by? What is the criteria?
Do you feel like God is calling you?
I'm a pastor. This is the first time I come across.
We don't have, I would say WWO's only criteria is really that you intend to use it. If you want to build your resume or have more pieces of paper on your walls, we are not interested in training you. But if you want to actually use it, we are very interested in training. Is that true?
Yeah.
What?
So what we do is actually at the start of the period, we would contact everybody, see what countries are really interested in, contact regional ambassadors, and then fundraise beforehand, before we do, like for example, for the seed funding, we fundraise before we implemented in those 6 countries. So we had the structure, we knew who we were going to work with before we implemented.
Let me just say one other thing. We would love for God to provide more donors in your countries and donors regionally and globally to have. So for example, in my best world, every one of you who wants to leave here and do, any of these trainings elsewhere, you would have whatever money you would need to get the people's transport there and get them food while they're there, and to actually do the training. And then once you do the training, it doesn't help if you do the training if they don't actually implement it. So these seed grants, they actually had to implement the program they got trained on. So if they got trained in Catching Boys to Men, they actually needed to go into the schools and take the communities and implement it. And so that is a different cost than just getting people all together to give them their food. In the ideal world, there would be enough funding for both the training and the implementing the programs, but often the implementing the programs cost was borne. All of you already work somewhere. And if you're already working somewhere, often you're working in programs who are serving families and children. And a lot of what happened is inside of those networks where people were working, they started using what works instead of what doesn't work. Because the whole point of what's in the roadmap is we know it works. I met with the director of UNICEF for Uganda 5 years ago after we had done an Inspire training. And the room was full of about like 80 people across churches and non-governmental organizations getting trained. And this director of UNICEF for Uganda says to me, Susan, I wish I could throw away 80% of what these people in this room do because we have no idea if it works. And I think UNICEF is just funding a lot of things. And we just, why do you fund things if we don't know if it works? If I could get rid of 80% of what we're spending our money on and spending our money only on what is in Inspire, I would do that because we would know it works. So a lot of times there are a lot of faith-based organizations that if they already have funding, say World Vision, they already have funding someplace, they can choose to transition to what they had been using and use something new and different, even though that also has its costs. But in the best of all worlds, that's not what's happening. These seed grants, there were a lot more countries that participated in our training than there was seed grants to give. So it was a competitive process. People submitted like a one-page request of a small amount of money. How much was it? Like $5,000? And then by our global team, they were anonymously just read and scored for quality, and the highest quality ones were the ones that ended up getting the seed funding. And so in my other best of worlds, there were 4 more that I wished were kind of like came in second, and they still would have been good. I would have wished there was enough funding to do that. But part of the real commitment of World Health Orphans is to call on international leaders to collaborate. A lot of you have a lot of resources, like South Africa or India. I mean, a lot of you have a lot of resources in your own settings that can be used to support the things that work. Okay, we have gone too long. Anything else anybody wants to say?
Can I just get you to repeat when you gave the illustration of the coaching boost and then the Christians did it versus
Yes. So when the Christian organization did, when World Vision implementing coaching boys into men in Wakana, it worked better than even the research had shown it worked in reducing sexual violence against girls. So they had measured beforehand among 8th grade boys, how many of you have already touched a girl inappropriately or you think it's fine to do that, for example, those kinds of things. And then they measured it before the program, and they measured in the group who got nothing, and they measured in the group who got the program. And once they got the program, their norms changed significantly. This is in the study, in the research. And they were much less likely to think it was okay to inappropriately touch girls in private places, and they were much less likely to have done it in the period since they had had training. So that was good. When you looked at the World Vision results of what happened, they actually even had better improvements than the research had had. And my theory is you have someone implementing a program and who does it with fidelity. And my hunch is those people, once they know those messages that are key, they probably kept repeating them. And we don't know how long each group repeated it, or, kept reinforcing it. But we do know it worked significantly better. And the Gilbert, the World Vision lead who implemented that, sometimes the leads of NGOs and governments are at the same place. I was at a global meeting with him in Canada at one point before he ever did this. And he said, oh, we have great stories. And he started telling me, and I just said, can I tell you something? Data are not stories. Like, ask Christians all the time, like, you think your stories are good. They are not, and nobody that with funding is going to fund your stories. I mean, I was speaking as a government person. And he said that like it was so eye-opening for him. He never thought that his stories were data. But so then when there came the opportunity to do the study, he was thrilled to do it, and he led very well. And all of us were thrilled with it. Okay. We are really done. I could talk so long. Thank you guys so much.
If you don't know where to find the tea, please follow me. It's on the same floor, but it's on the other side.
Are we going back over to the main?